buon pomeriggio e come stamattina, vado a parlare in questo contesto in inglese, però sono contenta di parlare anche in italiano con i gruppi e dopo le domande, eccetera. I just want to tell you all, before we get started, what an extraordinary day it's been thus far. As I mentioned, we work globally, and it's rare that we get this kind of enthusiasm in a first setting. I was really inspired to see everyone say, no, don't cut the presentation short, keep talking. We're really onto something here, and as I've shared with several of you this morning, from outside of Italy, it's actually very difficult, more difficult to get information about what's happening in the sharing economy here compared to many other countries in Europe. And that's a problem that I would love to figure out with some of you how to tackle it. Maybe that is a challenge, but it's really exciting and inspiring to be here today to see how much is going on and how much enthusiasm there is, because outside of Italy, I think somehow that message is getting partly lost. So just wanted to say thank you and share my excitement with what we're onto here. In terms of my comments this afternoon, I'm just going to give a couple of reminders from this morning about what we want to keep in mind as we move into the work groups. And then I'm going to give a few thoughts on why I think it's so important that we have really diverse groups and how that has played out for us working with companies and governments, and I'll hold off on that for now. And then finally, I'm going to walk you through a series of examples of collaboration in other countries and other contexts, both from small sharing economy companies, big companies, governments, really to just start to get the creative juices flowing around what's happened elsewhere that could carry into what we might do here in Italy. So backing up to this morning and just a quick recap, I really want to have all of us to keep in mind that those slides around the collaborative economy, looking at collaborative experiences, redistribution markets, and product as a service. But within those, what were the common drivers behind all of these business models? And I focused on three things. One was this concept of idling capacity and underutilized assets. And I joke sometimes that putting on goggles, like swimming goggles, it's almost like you put on a pair of glasses and you start looking at every asset that's around you. Like, I'm like, that chair is idle. Or that building is idle. Look at idling assets everywhere differently. Think about what that does to you. I start seeing wealth everywhere that's simply not being used. How might we, as we again move into interactive sessions, keep that in mind? How can you start seeing idling capacity and value that's invisible to us now, but isn't necessarily if we can put it into shared use? Secondly, this concept of technology that can help build efficiency and trust. What is necessary for that to happen? Because we know that companies are figuring out ways to do this. We also know that there are challenges related to demographics or digital literacy or concerns about trust as well. Third, this concept of the values and the drivers. And the values really being about humanness, openness, empowerment, things that really set our internal compass, coupled with the external drivers. And I think all of us are very aware now of what those are: economic efficiency, environmental efficiency and sustainability, using assets more environmentally, in an environmentally more sustainable way. And third, community building and the social fabric. So I mentioned to a couple of people at lunch that for those of you who have heard the term triple bottom line investing or impact investing, that is something that we typically characterize as part of social enterprise, or maybe something that you would look at in the developing world context, for example. But many sharing economy companies are triple bottom line investments by their very nature. So how might that play out into other initiatives focused on sustainability, focused on impact investing, going beyond how we traditionally characterize collaborative consumption? So keep those tenets, those principles in mind. Now, why it is so important, and I also have to say, Rachel Botsman and I and my other colleagues, we do a lot of public speaking in lots of different settings, and we love doing that. We consider part of our job to be evangelizing the sharing economy. But it's rare, relatively rare, that we actually get to couple a presentation with an active working session like today. So I think also congratulations and compliments to the Fondazione, to Cattolica, to Collaboriamo, for sure, for taking that next step to make this really interactive. And why I say that is because the diversity that we have in the room today of expertise, of position, of geography is extraordinary. And this is a case in which I don't want to sound trite, but diversity will be our strength at the end of the day. And why I say that is because we often work on issues. For example, a car company will call us and say, oh my goodness, there's this sharing economy, we don't know what to do. So we'll go and maybe host a workshop for them, teaching them about the sharing economy. But when we do this, the one topic we don't talk about is mobility and transportation. We talk about everything else that's happening, because what the transportation people can see is just in transportation. They don't recognize that this is related to accommodation or tourism or education. And so by zooming out, they start going, oh my goodness, we get inspired and we get our ideas for innovation. If we're only looking at our vertical, we're not going to be very innovative. But if we can zoom out and connect these broader dots, all of a sudden, they start seeing opportunities where they didn't before. They start connecting dots in a different way. And so that's what I think we can do today, and that's why I'm really excited that in the financing group, there will be finance folks and there will be other folks. It will be really mixed up. And also, if we were to report back where we see the most innovative ideas come from, you heard me mention this morning that that enabling environment and those enablers, that's where there's a lot of innovation happening today. So think about what's on the edges. Don't think about what you would typically look at in the center or in the core. Think about pulling things out from the periphery, because again and again, it's showing that that's where the next phase of, again, innovation, but success stories will come from. Now, finally, just want to walk you through a few examples of some of my favorite collaborations. They haven't all been super successful, but they've all been successful in some way. And really not intending to paint any particular picture other than that, given the diversity of people and interests in the room, hopefully at least one of my examples will resonate with everyone here, even if not all of them. So taking, again, a step back, looking at what big companies have been doing in this space. One really good example, I'll give a few, but one good one is General Motors, big car company, right? They have partnered with a peer-to-peer car sharing service called Relay Rides. Does General Motors or Relay Rides, has anyone heard those terms? GM probably, but not really. Okay. Yeah. Relay Rides is a car company where, again, I can rent you my car. It's an app. It's Zipcar with my own car. My neighbors can rent my car. I can make money. It's good. So GM is trying to figure out what do they do in the sharing economy. And they realize that they have a lot of infrastructure, and they also have technology. In their case, it's called OnStar technology that makes driving really simple. It means you can unlock your door without a key, for example. It means you can locate your car through GPS. Lots of different things. they realized that the easiest way for them to learn about the sharing economy was to actually partner with relay rides. So they invested some capital, but also technology in this startup company. And really what this reflects is each company was able to benefit from the other company's strengths. Relay Rides was able to tap into investment capital, technology that they could never have afforded to develop, and a better understanding of how a big car company works, because ultimately they hope to be a big mobility player. GM, for its part, got to learn directly about the sharing economy without having to go and build a fleet of vehicles or spend a lot of money on its own research. So that's a really good example. And again, the partnership has gone well. Relay Ride's ridership is up, and they're learning a lot more about the needs, the technological needs of their clients, and what makes the driving experience and car sharing experience seamless, very fluid, and frictionless. Another example I mentioned briefly this morning, the partnership between Marriott Hotels and Liquid Space. So Marriott, maybe they feel threatened by Airbnb, as we noticed, not so much so far, as far as we know, but they are realizing that they're sitting on a lot of idling capacity, not just hotel rooms when they're not booked, but how many of you have been into a hotel when a big conference hotel when there's not a conference there? I can almost hear the money just being sucked out of the hotel. And they realize, that's a lot of space that we could put to use. And so for them, too, it became not only how do we monetize or use our assets more efficiently monetarily, but also how do we rethink what a hotel is, so that people don't think of a Marriott hotel only as a place to sleep, but this is where I can co-work, this is where I can connect with people. I work, for example, at a co-working space, but if I need to host a meeting with 20 people, that's hard to do. Well, I now actually can just use Liquid Space and go to Marriott and have a nice conference room just for the period of time that I need. So again, they're building on the benefits of one another's strengths. Marriott doesn't have to develop an app or a platform of its own. It can use Liquid Space to do that. Liquid Space, in turn, is just able to add a whole bunch of inventory to its roster at zero cost. Liquid Space actually makes money because they sell the platform to Marriott. So it's a win-win. Both organizations end up creating additional income and also value for their stakeholders. Then if we look at what some sharing economy companies are doing in this space, and again, as I mentioned this morning, some of these platforms are monetizable, some of these no money changes hands, but value is created. I very much want to treat those two scenarios equally, because I think a lot of what gets the press are those monetizable models, but in fact, in the aggregate, there's an enormous amount of money and value that's being created in the non-monetized setting, even though it doesn't end up in the news quite so much. But if we look at the case, for example, of Airbnb, so I mentioned that on one hand, they had partnered with the governments of Rio and Sao Paulo in advance of the Olympics and the World Cup. That is a great example of public-private partnership. If you can think about how much money will be made from the World Cup in Brazil, it's a lot. And think about traditionally who would get the benefit of that. Big hotels, big events organizers. Very rarely would it be a person living in a favela or a small entrepreneur. By partnering with Airbnb, they are ensuring that more people can stay in more parts of the city, and that more of the money that is invested and spent on these events goes to more people in the community and stays invested there. Very, very good form of partnership to think about. How might we take that way of thinking about things and apply it elsewhere? In addition, some of you might have heard about this, last year after Hurricane Sandy in New York. Again, shortage of places for people to stay. Big problem in one of Airbnb's biggest markets. Airbnb, what I love is this wasn't something that the company set out to do, but they immediately in the aftermath of the hurricane had hosts saying, I want to host people for free. I want to help. I need to do something to help. And so over time, what resulted were thousands of Airbnb listings in the New York City area just being offered as help, as, you know, not pro bono activity, but it was a form of disaster relief and emergency management. That's pretty powerful, and one of the areas where we see the most opportunity from a city's perspective is thinking about disaster planning, resilience. In an event of an emergency, we're going to need to share assets because, you know, things will have happened, meaning that it will be harder to access whatever it is we need, whether it's a power tool or medical supplies or a place to live. If you think about triggering the sharing economy in times of disaster, think about what systems we could set up in advance to be able to share immediately in times of disaster, but also just to be able to share on an everyday basis. You can think about things like tool lending libraries, which are quite common in many neighborhoods around the world. What might that look like in the Italian context? Related to that, just wanted to mention in the spirit of emergency management, in San Francisco, there is a consortium of sharing economy companies, so from all kinds of sectors, that have come together and formed an organization called BayShare. And they have partnered with the government of the city of San Francisco, and they have a seat on the Disaster Council. So in the event of an earthquake, these companies have pre-agreed to signed up to put their assets, their people, their infrastructure, their delivery channels into shared use for whomever needs it at that time. What might it look like to consider or apply the BayShare kind of thinking to different cities or different situations here in Italy? Just a couple more, and then we'll get started on the hard work, but the fun work as well. I also mentioned Any Road this morning, which is around tourism. I won't say much more than that, other than we should all look at the Any Road website, because obviously, just given the tourism sector here in Italy, and the fact that that is likely to grow, that is likely to boom, regardless of what might happen in other sectors, how can we think about new ways of empowering and catalyzing innovation simply within the tourism sector and for tour guides as a whole? Related to this, I always like to call out, there's a site in Greece, and again, I don't know that this has anything to do with the state of the Greek economy. It does, but it's also something that the richest economy in the world should be doing. And there's a platform that's called Up Greek Tourism. This is upgreektourism.gr. This is a way that a crowdfunding campaign site for tourism campaigns around the world. They've launched funding for why should you come to Greece in London and New York and DC, and it's all been citizen-led ideas for what's captivating about Greek tourism. Really, really like it. And a final note on the crowdfunding end of things, we're also seeing more and more crowdfunding collaborations between multiple stakeholders. So there's one example, a good example is public gardens. They want to create parklets and playgrounds and things like that. The city can commit a certain amount of funding, but not all that's required. But there's another nonprofit focused on urban planning that can they can contribute a certain amount of funding, but not all of it. Both of them are able to cost share or match their funds and then triple the investment through public crowdfunding. So imagine a civic park that gets its funding 1/3 from the city, 1/3 from an environmental NGO, and 1/3 from crowdfunding from the community members themselves. Now, in that scenario, none of those three stakeholder groups could have done that on their own. The only way they could get this done was to bring everything together. But once you have one trigger in place, the other pieces can fall into place. And then the final piece that I just want to call out, and I know that there are some people, for example, from the WeShare community here today, which is terrific. There are different kinds of grass-led community groups. WeShare is one of them, and WeShare is, it's called WeShare because it began in France, but they've got different chapters and member groups throughout Europe. There's another organization which some of you might have heard of called Peers, peers.org. They're also global, but headquartered in the US. And these are very much grassroots communities that are about bringing individuals together to explore the many different kinds of ways to share. Now, at Collaborative Lab, for instance, we work with the governments themselves, but in order to get governments, I sort of joke, it's like the grass tops and grassroots and grass tops. We need both levels. Governments can really help grassroots initiatives to scale, but they do rely on having champions at the grassroots. So the question I have here, it's less of an example, but it's more, what's the appropriate role? Where else might, if you're a big company, for instance, how and when do you reach out to a grassroots organization? How do the sharing economy companies themselves build their communities to do more than just, rent out a home or rent the car? What's that added layer of social value that goes beyond strictly the mission of the organization? So I think I'm going to stop there. I do have more examples, but those are a few of my favorites that kind of cast a different light around the role of big companies, startup companies, governments, nonprofits, monetized, not monetized, global companies, local companies, you name it. But each one of you here probably has an affinity to one or more of those target areas, if you will. Bring that expertise and that passion to the table, but then open your eyes and ears to everything that's on the periphery. Because I have a funny feeling that some of the biggest insights won't be directly in your line of vision. They'll be somewhere half a degree or maybe more removed from what you would normally think about. And so my hope would be that you take the best nugget, the best piece of each of the models I just described and apply it to the problem that you'll be presented with. So as far as we can tell, as I like to say, in the sharing economy, unlike a lot of other places, we're not looking for a new technology that doesn't exist. We're not looking for a lot of money. Yes, funding does play into this, but the assets we're looking to share already exist. So the dots are there. All that we need to do is connect them in ways that has never happened before, at least not in the modern era. So with that, I look forward to this afternoon's discussions and challenges, and we'll, I guess, be visiting all of you at some point.